book discussion. Everyone here is lying by Shari Lapena. I haven't finished the book fully because it kind of let me down, but I still will discuss it because I went through most of it and I want to do it justice by discussing it because it did make me think. Did keep me interested for a while, and I think Shari's books are interesting. She depicts really crazy situations, very uncomfortable situations, crazy situations, situations where people are, in unbelievable, difficult circumstances, and then they kind of come out. The same in this book, but I feel like she kind of let the reader down a bit by being very predictable and also kind of going against the grain. Like a lot of it is just not believable anymore. And I think one of the three things I want to discuss is really what it takes to write a good novel. And I think the answer is it takes a good story, and this is not a particularly good story. For new listeners, the Nothing Wrong podcast is the purpose of the podcast is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So you might think, okay, why are we discussing a book of this nature? It's a thriller. It's one of those books you find in the bookstore, almost, maybe not at the airport, but it's something between a real bookstore and an airport bookstore. It's a suspense novel in a sense, but it's not really a suspense novel. So I think to Shari's credit, it is something in between, which makes it interesting. That's why I'm discussing it, even without finishing it. So, but the purpose again is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. And reading is not just a pastime of hedge fund managers; it's actually part of the job. It helps us navigate the world. It helps us. It's kind of yoga for the mind. It exercises the mind. It gives you a reflection of what you're thinking, and in that sense, we think reading is very important. That's why we put it on the pedestal, and that's also why we discuss it. And no matter how you slice it and dice it, these are not book reviews, by the way. So we don't make any recommendations whether you should buy or not buy a book. Sometimes we're excited and we would say, look, you got to read this book. And sometimes we're not. This one, I would say, it's on rather like don't waste your time. A rubric. But nevertheless, a couple of things to discuss. We're going to discuss 3 points here. Kids' innocence is a bug, not a feature. Lying is more difficult than you think, and what does it take to write a good novel. This is not even one podcast. It's February 11th, 2024. This is Krim Delco. It's a Sunday. There's no update. For the year, we are down 15.5%. The market's up 3.8%. We're underperforming by 19.3%. So let's get right into it. Everyone Here is Lying, a book by Shari Lapena. I think I have to give the author credit. She's very good at, describing circumstances that are almost impossible, but still kind of she gets away with it. So it's in that sense believable. It's not like some fantasy novel or Harry Potter type situation. It is real, embedded in the real world. She's showing some dark sides of humanity. I think that's certainly part of the discussion points here that I'm not going to touch upon. This is not my thing. It's not particularly interesting to me. I think the dark side of humanity, you can approach it through somebody like Nietzsche. You can approach it to somebody like this novel, and it's certainly part of the interest that people could have when discussing this book. I'm going to talk about 3 things here. One is kids' innocence is a bug, not a feature. So what does that mean? In a nutshell, I think our society is obsessed with some sort of notion of innocence of kids, and it has some merit. It gives people a chance to maybe okay. Let me put this in context. Okay, what I'm talking about here is a general tendency of a liberal society to give people a pass. And I think, particularly in the United States, this happens more than in other places with kids. So we give kids a pass, whether we label them HDDD or ADDD or whatever it is, or bipolar or mentally challenged. We give them a pass, which is a good thing. I think we need to give people more passes. There's more talent. There's more interesting people to be nurtured in a pool of people in a society if we give people the freedom to explore themselves and be who they are. But there are limits to that, and I think it's a tough line to cross for society. Okay, where do you draw the line? And in this particular case, I think it's clear. There's a character here that just doesn't compute. At least not for me. We can't have people like that go around and terrorize other people, or even themselves, or their family, or whatever it is. It's like there has to be a line drawn. Where that line is, I think that's probably more difficult to answer. But I think I want to just leave it at it's about not a feature to consider kids innocent a priori. I think there's humans have agency, and that is what humans are. They solve problems. They have some sort of intelligence, whether it's the kind of intelligence that uh, solves problems, or whether it's even sort of a David Deutschian intelligence of, like, you understand what your problems actually are. You find problems, which is maybe a more general way to design an intelligent agent. But whatever humans are, they have agency, and with agency comes accountability. And I think there's no age limit to that. There are nuances. There's it's everything is on a spectrum, of course. I think a general in the army has different responsibilities than a 10-year-old, but we all come with agency. And I think as a society, we're better off acknowledging that than treating people as sort of untouchable because of whatever reason it is, whether it's mental illness, whether it's age or gender or whatever it is. It's not a good thing. The same way it's not good to not give people rights, it's also not good to give them sort of a free pass, because that yields to abuse, and that yields to difficulties that just are suboptimal in terms of us on a societal level. There's some economic concepts here, free riding, moral hazard, things like that have been discussed for decades in economics. I think they're penetrating our society now in different ways. I think this novel touches upon that. Again, kids' innocence is about not a feature. We have to think about it a little bit harder and find ways to deal with certainly a perceived innocence of kids, or a lack of experience, and give them a chance to grow and become productive human beings, while at the same time protecting society from abuse. I think the second thing I want to talk about is the concept of lying, which, as the name says in this novel, comes in different shades, and it's really more difficult than you think. And I would say that there is no such thing as lying, really. I mean, there's some sort of analogy to the conservation of energy, the first law of thermodynamics, which I think states that there's a conservation of truth. Like you can suppress it, you can put it aside, but it always comes back. Like you can't just undo the truth. Again, this is probably controversial. Some people might say, "What are you talking about? Look at all this misinformation in the media." But even there, in the end, it's not so bad. As much misinformation as there is, the truth pops up it more often than not. And I think in this novel, the lying is almost like a character itself. The lie seeps through the novel in an interesting way, and I think, I don't know if Shari did this on purpose, but I would say that's definitely sort of a crafty thing she did. She created a character, a virtual character that is defined by lie. Like the lie is a character, which impersonates itself in many different characters. So I think that was interesting, but without sounding like too like, oh, you shouldn't lie or anything. This is not about that. Okay, my point here is just simply that lying is like an oxymoron, in a sense that you can't really lie. Like you can suppress the truth, but the more you lie, the more you have to invest in suppressing the truth, and it just becomes very difficult to very expensive to suppress the truth for a long time. You can see that in shenanigans on Wall Street. You can see that in politics, even in dictatorships. Like, the Soviet Union eventually collapsed because it was built on a lie. And it took a book like Solzhenitsyn to just uncover the truth. And I think these things happen along the lines of many situations, whether it's on the national level, whether it's in families, whether it's in, marriages or whatever it may be. The truth always pops up. I mean, it's an old people saying. It's almost, this has been going on since the Bible and even before the Bible. I think every society, as long as humans exist, at least in the form of the Homo sapiens, has had a very powerful relationship with the truth. And I think that because there is, like I said, a conservation of truth in the world, at least as far as humans are concerned. And there's also probably even an application of for AI here, which is that if you have intelligence in any kind of form that reflects itself against nature in form of, let's say, embodied intelligence, decision-making agents, things like that, you can't escape the truth, because the truth, that the oracle nature is going to calibrate you. And no matter how much you think it's easy to lie, it's not. I think the third thing I want to discuss is what it takes to write a good novel. And the answer is it takes a good story. Now, what is a good story? I think there's plenty of creative writing classes, plenty of artists out there that have an idea of what that may be. And I don't want to discuss this into too many details here, just because I think I don't have a good idea of what a good story actually is. But here's a couple of things I want to say. I think first, I want to say that, in my opinion, a good story has to have a relationship between people that have agency, and that relationship has to grow. It doesn't have to be positive, but if you take some of the canonical stories, whether it's the Bible, whether it's The Godfather, whether it's Scarface, whether it's There Will Be Blood, or some of those movies, or whether it's some of my favorite books like The Magic Mouth by Thomas Mann, or some of the recent books I read for example, the book, the name eludes me now, about there's this girl that became an aviator. Steinbeck's books. I mean, big literature, big novels. They all have one thing in common, which is this building of characters within relationships. And humans are defined with their relationship. And I think in this book, that's where Shari completely fails. The relationships are shallow, predictable, uninteresting. The cheating husband is just a shallow idiot. The cheating wife is just a good-looking, useless guy. It's all just boring stuff. And I think relationships are deep. Whether it's relationships with your spouse or your mother or your kids, you can build deep relationships. Do that. Don't have boring stories. I think the one thing I want to learn from this novel is really that, I don't want my life to be like this. I don't want it to be predictable. I don't want it to be defined by problems and lies. I want it to be defined by depth and interesting relationships. And I think that's what it takes to write a good story. I mean, this would be my take on that. So, summarize book discussion. Everyone Here is Lying by Shari Lapena. I did not finish the book, so it did let me down. And the reason is number 3 of my discussion point. What does it take to write a good novel? A good story, and a good story starts with deep interpersonal relationships, where she completely fails. Her characters and relationships are shallow and boring. I think where she excels is really on the bringing a lying as a character into the book. That was interesting. And then the kid's innocence is a bug, not a feature. That's something I took from the book. I don't know if the novel, if the author actually intended that. But my point is that our obsession with kids' innocence is just a reflection of our own weakness and insecurity as adults. And we're going to hurt our society if we don't change that. Thank you.